Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of the Renewables podcast, and I'm very excited about this one. Excited and a little bit worried because this is our first one with a customer, and this is one of my customers from my company. So this could either go really well for me or it could be a bit of a disaster, but either way it should be good viewing. So before we get started, please like, subscribe and all of that. I'm going to put this in at the start so that if you don't watch it right to the end, you can do it now. But thanks very much for watching anyway. And we're going to jump straight into it and ask how the people opposite me are doing. So Mark, firstly, co-host, how are you doing?
Really well, thanks, Sam. I'm looking forward to this to glean intel of how you go about proposing your system so I can undercut a good 10% everywhere.
Yeah, well, this might be the end of the Renewables podcast, or certainly the end of us getting my customers on if Mark starts to try and rob customers, but be good. And we've got Rob, who's one of my customers. How are you doing, Rob?
Very well, thank you. It's good to see you again and meet Mark. And,
be here, eh?
Excited.
Yeah, no, it's good to have you on, and hopefully the idea around this is that Rob can give us an idea of what his thought process was when he was getting a system, learn about what he had installed, and he's got some facts and figures as to how the system's been doing. So hopefully if you're watching this as a customer or even as an installer, you can kind of get a bit of an idea as to how these systems go together and what customers want when they're considering these systems. So first then, Rob, what was it that we installed for you those years ago?
So it was very expensive.
Oh, here we go.
No, so we had a solar edge system. I was pretty keen on having sort of a full integrated system. So we had a 5 kilowatt solar edge inverter, 10 kilowatt, or I think it's 9.7
usable. Yeah.
Into that solar edge battery, which I think at the time were quite new as well.
I think it was just out, wasn't it?
Yeah. And then a bit after that, due to stock and due to COVID and all that sort of stuff, the hot water diverter was installed.
Yeah.
So that were kind of the garage system, if you like. And then on the roof we had 20 400 watt per light, all black solar panels. So we had 8 south facing and another 12 that are kind of southwest facing. So
Yeah,
quite a big system, I think. For domestic.
It was a good size system from what I can remember, and I know you've done some really good YouTube stuff on that. So if you want a bit more than we can cover on this podcast about Rob's system, then head over to DIY Journey YouTube channel, because he's gone into that in some real depth, which is really good. So that's kind of what you've ended up with. But why did you want a system in the first place?
I think there's so many variables to it as to why. So me as an individual, I like change, I like new things, I like trying things. Solar was one of them things that I think probably most people watching this and the customers will probably question is it worth the money? Because it's not a little outlay, let's be fair. And at the time of decision, I think we probably already started talking, but this was sort of pandemic times when everything was going through the roof. We didn't know what were happening with gas prices, and electric prices were going through the roof. And I had an EV coming as well. And it was one of them decisions that you kind of just say, let's just go for it, because I think if you put your business head on, and that's how I kind of do our household sort of budgetary, is us spending the money would release money on a monthly basis. We were both employed at the time, and like cash flow, if you like, personal cash flow.
Yeah.
And I thought, rather than when I get an EV, it's going to be costing us £400 or £500 a month in electric, let's just get rid of that. And best decision I've ever made, really. But
so it was purely a financial one. There was no environmental aspect to your
I think now we have the system, and I know how it's running. I'm happy to kind of say, not we saying too much early on, but I think us as individuals have an onus on to support the grid as well. Everyone getting EVs and that side of things, and I'm no expert in this field, but there is an element of that, and I'd say that's come more now than beforehand, and it were probably more a financial decision up front. And then add into that, you know, I like new things. I like trying things.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've learnt in life that people make comments on various things just flippantly, and they don't know the facts. Whereas I like to go and find them facts, and, you know, not prove them wrong, but just prove to myself that whether it's the right decision or not.
Yeah. So with you then, Mark, so your customers that you're dealing with, do you find that it's mainly driven on price as to, or savings, if you like,
I sat thinking to ask that question to you. So that's,
well, I got in there
beat
first.
me to it, but I would say most consumers are coming to us based on the price. They're wanting to know what the payback is and the value of the system more than the environmental side of things. But much like Rob said, that does come later on. I think it did for me. My driving force for getting solar on my own home and batteries was saving money. We've got the electric van and trying to run as much of our home without consuming from the grid as possible. But now, when these things happen and you can support the grid when it needs it, I think that's a really nice thing to do as well from an environmental point of view. So maybe that's something that other consumers find as well. It'd be interesting in the comments if you are watching as a consumer and you've got solar, if that's been something you've done. What about yourself in your business?
Before I say that, I think if you are watching this as a consumer and you've had solar or that you are thinking of getting solar, what are your main points that you're considering now, or that now that you've got solar, that what was your thought process as to why you went through that? But for me, definitely the cost saving. I think it's in humans to have that first. Well, how much is this going to save me? It's
Especially
like
Yorkshire for
I would
absolutely.
all those three Yorkshire as well.
Yeah, exactly. So very much more up north. But I think there is that. There's always going to be that level of, right, this is going to save me X amount. That's going to pay back in X amount of years. But I think whilst you probably need that to get that right in your head, I think the difference comes with how much weight you put on it actually being a 15-year payback, and you think it's quite a long time. It's how much weight you put on that as a person. Some people would see that 15 years and go, no, not interested. And the difficult thing in renewables is that new tariffs come out all the time that then could slash that. Energy prices go up and down, which could elongate that or slash that. And so like you mentioned right at the start, Rob, it is a bit of a, sort of paraphrasing what you said, but it is a bit of a leap of faith. And you kind of have to go with it because you feel like you're interested in it. You feel like the numbers are close and could probably improve. And certainly at the time of you getting yours, interest rates were next to nothing. And you kind of go, like you said, releasing money monthly by making a capital investment because you're removing your energy bill. Now you've got some interesting figures for us later on, but I think there's a lot that comes into these decisions from what I've seen with other customers, more so than just, it's got a 5-year payback, bosh, I'm going to do it. Because that's the feed-in tariff era, and that year is gone because you were getting basically a set amount per year because you were getting paid to generate it. Whereas now it's so much based on savings. It's so flexible now because it depends what tariff you're on, what you're using, what you're powering, how big your household is.
And it's hard to, I think for you guys as installers, you don't necessarily have the answers that the customer want because you're installing it. You're not using it, as a long-term thing. I know you guys have got solar on your own properties, but for me, there's that many variables up front that you just can't. And like you say, in my experience of, I think it's about 2 years now we've had the system, and what I've learned is, like you say, tariffs. You just can't. My tariff, so my figures that we'll go through later is from last year as a full year. The tariffs are completely different now. My situation is different. Last year I didn't have an EV for a portion of the year. At the front end and the back end I did. So my usage was completely different. I couldn't calculate that up front. No chance. And, it's just one of them. It is a leap of faith.
Yeah. So for you, the reason that you wanted to go for solar and battery was really to free up some money from your monthly outgoings because you were basically reducing your electric and a bit of gas through the hot water diverter for the hot water. To do it because you're interested in the equipment, and you sort of thought it was the investment was kind of there, the payback time was kind of there, but no, that's good.
There's also at the time I had a bit of a social media presence.
Yeah.
So, you know, there was that element that I were getting, and I'm sure you guys do with your media presence, that you will get bombarded with, you know, some opinions and things. And it was good to be in a position that we could go and try and find them facts out and, you know, be able to share it. Unfortunately, I lost my
You lost your account. You've got it back now, haven't you?
Got it back, but I don't do it like I used to. But no, it were a bit of a fact-finding mission as well, you know, and quite helpful.
In terms of the content and the installer that you ended up, sorry, not the content, the equipment and the installer that you selected, did you already have that in your mind, or was that through conversations with Sam, with the Solar Edge?
To be fair, I found out Sam from his own kind of social media, and I think I recall it was all to do with, he was in a loft and he did a video to do with fire safety, and a colleague of my mum actually had a house burned down from, and I think from the feed-in tariff days of, you know, when potentially they were being chucked in, and that always played in the back of my mind. So then to see someone that's, you know, a physical video of someone explaining it, and then when you start digging into that and start following Oval and then the YouTube, is you start getting a bit more comfort as a customer, you know, to understand that, look, we're on the same wavelength here, and then you start building that relationship up from, you know, we there were no sort of social media interface as such. It was purely customer and installer, weren't it? Really,
I remember that video as well, because it was a really shocking one. So basically, it made me kind of really worry about a lot of systems out there, because it was basically, there was a lot of cable, solar PV cable in a loft, and there was an inverter on a loft wall. And I don't even think this installer had heard about a cable clip ever. And the DC cables had come through the roof and then were just laid along the loft. And then right where the loft hatch was, which was where the inverter was, the cable just swooped straight into the bottom of the inverter. And what had happened was, when they were throwing things through the loft hatch to store it, it was like the DC cables were just strung along. So basically the boxes or whatever it was that were there, it caught the cables and pulled them out of the MC4s. So effectively, you had two live DC ends there and stuff. And in the loft, I'd basically said, look, this is how important it is, and basically touched the ends together and showed the arc. And I was surrounded by cardboard boxes and Christmas trees and stuff. And you think, well, if that had only have knocked them together, it would have started arcing during the day, and it could have taken the roof off.
Scary, isn't it? What you can think of these things. We all hear these horror stories, and you see the intent of regulations when they come out. But that's why these regs change, isn't it? That's why we've seen the past document we've spoken about. Stuff like this actually happens, and it's interesting that you had kind of price and the payback in your mind, but you were also focused in on that quality rather than just trying to find cheap, because that's something consumers make a mistake on, for me, when they're trying to figure out what they need. They're judging a system as a package, as a price, when really you're not always comparing apples with apples from both the installer side but also the equipment side, because you've proposed a Solar Edge system where somebody else, we won't say a brand, but they could have proposed something else that isn't equivalent to that, and technically you look at the outputs of them and they're similar, but it's not the same thing, is it?
I think that's one thing I find with documenting, you know, our purchase and our installation is, in particular on YouTube, where, you know, I was putting videos out there saying how's it doing, blah blah blah, and how much things cost. But then this comment saying, well, I could have a similar system for $7,000. Well, good on you, but please share a bit more information on what brand did you have installed, what warranties come with that, what protection is there with that. You know, lay out apples for apples, because it's not the same system, and I don't care what anyone says, really.
Yeah, and I think that's not always the fault of the customer. I don't think that's always the fault of the customer, because sometimes it is actually a breakdown in the communication of the installer to the customer, because you see, obviously you get how much you're going to generate, you get roughly an MCS payback, you get, you know, the kilowatt peak of the panels, you get the size of the battery, you get the inverter. And as a customer looking at that, they don't know that this brand is better than this brand, really, because it's not like well-known brands in the world that we're all, you know, used to hearing about. It's these, to the customer, obscure brands that they can't really compare, and everyone's busy and trying to work out what's best to do. And I think you have to get the best feeling for the installer, and I think social media is really good about that, because you can be watching an installer for 6 months without ever asking them a question, but building up in your own mind what you like about them and what you don't, and kind of choosing that. And that's why, social media has been a game changer for us as a business. But I think it has opened that conversation of where you, Rob, could be following 10, 15 different installers, all fitting different equipment, and hearing the case study quietly in the background of why each installer prefers that equipment, even dropping them questions, about that equipment. So if you are a customer, using social media, whilst it has its negative points, in this case, I think is a really good one, because you're able to do a lot of research and ask a lot of questions from the comfort without having a salesperson in your sat on your sofa, grease back hair, and kind of trying to sell you the dream.
Sounds like Matthew. There's the two aspects that I think for installers as well. Everyone looks at YouTube and social media as being about being an influencer, if you like. But as a business owner, it's a really good way to market what you do to consumers. You don't need a massive presence to get search traffic through Google in your local area. We found that first with my small YouTube channel as it begun like 2 or 3 years ago now. We were still getting those inquiries. So there's payback there, both sides of that equation. And it's interesting with the tariff thing you've mentioned as well, Rob, and speaking about the equipment, Sam, some of it integrates really well and easily with tariffs, so customers can get their payback much more easily, whereas some of the more budget options involve lots more manual control. And we've had customers coming to us now where they've had systems installed maybe a year or two ago, saying, is there any changes we can make? We're finding it really hard to get the best from what we've got without fiddling around with settings all the time. Do you see that with any? I guess if you're all Solar Edge, you maybe don't see that.
Yeah, I mean, we do slightly other. We don't do every system, but we do some other systems. Solar Edge is by far our favourite, but even with a premium brand like Solar Edge, it isn't immune from integration issues. Like, it's actually in some cases quite slow on the uptake on some of that, whereas some of the other brands like Give Energy are quite good on, like the Octopus. They've been involved with Octopus for a long time, and it's hard for us as installers to choose the best equipment to recommend. And we obviously did a lot of research into Solar Edge, and just by using it, and just got a really good feeling about where the regulations were going with, like, Safe DC and all this other stuff. But the integration thing is definitely where I think all this equipment's going. And that again comes back to why you chose to get a system, and looking at the paybacks and everything. You can't factor any of that in to your calculations, because you just don't know which way the market's going to go. I think the only thing you can think of is that as a country, the grid is just getting more and more flexible with wind turbines and more grid level solar and things. So to have a battery system, no matter what brand really, means that you can play around with the tariff that you're on and grid charge it. Sometimes, like with the Octopus tariffs, during negative pricing cycles, so you're actually taking money off your bill by using the power, which is just, how do you factor that into your payback?
It's funny you say that, because when our system was first installed, when I worked from home in the day, it were, get the car up, charge it out, let's do it, let's get it. And one day, I think it were over a 12-hour period, we got something like 90 mile in the car, for absolutely nothing, which is just crazy. But now, I solely charge my car from the grid at 7.5p overnight, because it's cheaper for me to buy that energy for in my car, but it's cheaper for me to charge my battery full come morning and then export it during the day and start the day with 100% house battery and be exporting at 15p a kilowatt.
Yeah, because I think that's that Intelligent Go tariff. So it's 7.5p overnight and 15p export.
Right,
So you can fill your battery in your car up with that and actually earn money from the exported solar. And again, we touched a little bit on the podcast with Dan from DMH about the difficulties in us as installers providing that payback time calculation, because it's set in the old ways of just based on what you generate, and you can't factor in, as us as installers, you can't factor in like other flexible tariffs, agile, like how do you factor in negative pricing cycles and working with heat pumps and hot water diverters, and it's a really tricky world.
Impossible. I've lost track already, and I try and keep on just more from my own personal interest and sadness, if you like. But, I try and keep up to date with where we're at with it and just how it's going. I just can't physically do it, and the figures we'll get on to, like I say, is from last year, because that's all I can give you. I can't do the year before because it weren't a full year. I can't do this year because we've just
still got
done
a way to
winter,
go.
so it's the worst sort of period, and it's impossible for you guys, I think, to offer that really.
It's trying to set a robust system at the outset for somebody without too much credibility on the tariffs, if you like. You said about the water diverter. I had a comment on a YouTube video from last week saying, why have you installed a water diverter? That's a waste of money for the consumer. And looking at the tariffs right now, you'd say, yeah, that's right. But this is something that the customer's going to maybe be using for 10, 15, 20 years. And we don't know. So at the stage of doing the install, putting that in place, kind of future-proofing things for not a massive expense, it still makes sense to do it for me. But you can see, looking at the tariffs, well, yeah, technically you're right, but also I make you wrong.
But then the flip of that is, are we better using less gas? And that's, for me, it's not worth me really having the hot water diverter, because it's cheaper for me to export it than it is to be using it. But I still use it, and it's still, because what we've also found is our hot water is actually hotter using the immersion heater than using the boiler. Don't know why, but I turn the water on. And, I still use it because I feel personally there's a bit of onus on us and responsibility to try and find a better way to use energy.
Yeah, and also if you think about it, during like the agile tariff times where you're getting paid to take power from the grid, having that diverter, yes, you could just turn your switch on the wall to turn your immersion heater on without a hot water diverter. Being able to do that from the app and remotely is really handy, and actually tracking how much you've sent into that immersion heater as well, to kind of try and keep track of stuff. I think the convenience is good there as well. And the thing is, we don't know if next time you look to renew your tariff, if all of these export tariffs are going to change as more people get onto them. You just don't know. And so again, it is a bit of a leap of faith, but it feels like you're jumping in the right direction. Yeah. You're not jumping back. You're not thinking about getting a coal, building a little coal bunker for a coal-fired heating system. You're jumping in the direction of travel that I feel like the country is. So this is just me trying to justify selling this system to but no, that's good. So my next question was why you kind of chose the equipment you did, and we've obviously already touched on the fire safety side of that. And this isn't a plug for Solar Edge. This is just more of the thought process, really, of what you were thinking when you were looking at the different equipment out there.
I think you quoted for another option, if I remember rightly. It's a slightly cheaper
Quite possibly,
option, at the time. And for me, it was everywhere you looked was Solar Edge. It don't matter what you searched on the internet, was Solar Edge, everything. And then you start looking into warranties. For me, like that plays a big part of payback as well, because that was my benchmark of, say, I don't know, warranty with 15 years. If it's less than 15 years, it in theory shouldn't cost me anything if something breaks. If it's over 15 years, it's going to start costing me, and then that's going to eat into your time. So I think, if I remember rightly, Solar Edge had the better options from a warranty point of view. Then there was the whole the integration and optimizers, which again is a big cost in addition, but down the line of every panel's going to work independently. Then should there be an issue, it can shut down. If please do butt in if I'm saying things wrong.
No, it's good to hear from your point of view as to your understanding of it. Yeah.
And am I right in saying that things drop down to like a volt with the inverter?
That's the DC safe side of things, yeah.
And the protection. And for me, again, at the time, my missus was pregnant. We had a little one on the way. The last thing I want to be doing is importing risk to us as a family. And it just seemed like the right option with the right backing, and it just seemed right. It was dearer, but it's probably worth that investment, I think, over the other options.
For me, as an absolute fanboy of that equipment, I feel like, again, it's you've jumped in the direction of travel of going into a renewable system. Us as installers, at my company, we've tried to jump in the direction of travel of where I think the regulations are going to go with trying to isolate DC on the roof and making sure if there's a problem you haven't got 500, 600 volts sat there dangling when they're trying to carry you out. Hopefully never. But So yeah, and it's all decisions, and I think it comes down to people and the opinions and the best decision you can make at the time. And there's always going to be more equipment, better equipment coming out, but it's trying to get it designed right for you, and in your thoughts, being happy with the investment you make. Because no matter if you get a cheap system or a premium system, it's still a financial investment, isn't it? And that's conversations that we'll be having all the time with our customers, as to trying to get them to part with, between 10 and 30 grand, trying to get them to part with somewhere between that. It's a lot of money, and so you do need to make sure you do your research. And the good thing that I think social media brings, just to flip back to that, is that it holds us as installers to account. Because if Rob sees that I've done a system in a certain way and wants it like that, then he can't just go, oh, well, I think that's just how they always installed it. He's seen 15, 20, 30 installs like that. If he comes into his garage and it looks horrendous, which it wasn't, because he dropped a lot of it, then he can hold us to account and go, well, look at this one you just did in Newcastle, which I know that was one of the ones that you'd seen. Yeah. I want it like that. And if it isn't like that, and same with you, Mark, when they see one of the all-in-ones you've done, and when you go to someone else's house and they go, that doesn't look like anything like the standard that you did it at the other property, it holds you to account, and actually is kind of look at what it's going to look like before you buy it, so they know what to expect from you as well.
Yeah, we see that with the inquiries coming in. I was seeing your video, we want it with the backing board and everything neat with the trunking and stuff, and there's no real performance benefit to that, but it's what the consumer wants. They want it to look nice and on the wall. If you just turn up and start clipping your cables whilst technically meeting the regs, it's not what they're paying for. So it does bring that element of standards, I suppose, like you say, accountability and transparency, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rob, when you were going through the process of choosing, obviously we've spoken about why you chose the equipment you wanted to choose, but what were the main considerations you made when looking at like panels and panel locations and equipment locations, and when you're actually thinking, right, I know it's probably going to be this brand of stuff I want, but what were the main considerations with you having an installation that you wanted to make sure were right? And it's a bit loaded because we've actually had this conversation probably 2 years ago, but if you could tell everybody watching what your main considerations were, because it'll probably help other people to take those.
I think the main one was probably aesthetics.
Okay.
I cannot stand blue solar panels. I don't know what it is. They just don't do it for me. And I know they're not an aesthetically pleasing bit of equipment, but I am so particular, and I'm probably a bit of a unique customer that I just like things how I want them. And I think at the time black panels were starting to come about, so I think that were a conversation we had, because I think my initial quote was for another brand of panels, and I was like, well, can we have some black ones if possible? And then the pale lights come about, and then I think the opportunity to up them then to 400 watt panels. So for me it was like, oh, we're getting best of both worlds here. We can have all black panels and we can pretty much maximise the space on the roof as well. And then when you come down into the house, we're renovating a house at the, well, it's been ongoing forever, but I'm trying to, as cringy as it sounds, build like a dream garage here. One that it's my space, I want it exactly how I want it, and having Solar Edge helped fit that. And then I had a new consumer unit put in that all fit in with like Hager consumer unit that just matched, and it's all in a nice corner, fireboarded, and the location of the equipment weren't ideal. We're a cable the full length of the house in the ceiling space, but we got there, and ultimately aesthetics were probably
biggest
the driver.
I remember having the conversation because black panels were around, but there was quite a lot. There was some all black panels, but there were the ones that they were quite expensive, and it was that toss up as us as installers trying to get a system that didn't frighten you off as to the price. And I'm sure you come across this, Mark. Whilst we're trying to sort of tiptoe around, like trying to make sure you didn't we didn't lose out on the job to someone else that was doing a completely different system, but for a lot cheaper. And so there's that kind of chess play to try and work out where someone stands.
There's the customer aspect of that as well, of not wanting, because I mean, you're still very busy, but at the time you were unbelievably busy as well, weren't you? And then the last thing you want is me bombarding you saying, oh, can you price me for this? Can you price me for that? Can you do this? Can you do... And I don't know if everyone thinks that, but it's definitely a consideration of mine that if I'm busy, someone else is going to be busy. And it's a fine balance, I think, and it's a bit of chess both ways, isn't it, really?
Yeah, what do you find about that, Matt, with when customers are asking for a lot of different options? Do you find that tricky to deal with, or do you... Yes. Just remember, customers are watching this.
That job's been delegated to me. It wasn't one that I wanted within my business, but I kind of manage all the proposal side of things, and other people who enjoy the install side of stuff get to do the fun bit. And I get that quite a lot, where a customer will ask for a system and you'll propose it and they'll be like, well, can you just tweak it a bit with this and a bit with that instead of the battery sizes, take a few panels off, just to see the variation in price. And that all takes time, doesn't it? You'll know from doing that in your own business, Sam. With the panels, in terms of an overall system price now, I think it's less of a factor with the customer wanting all black, because panel prices have just fallen massively. But I guess going back to COVID times, when you were running through this with Rob, that wasn't the case. I would imagine those panels were quite expensive.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other fluctuation, isn't it? It's what companies have got stock where they're paying next to nothing for those panels, and what company that you maybe want to go with, but is having to buy those panels at the current price. So there's all these different factors to why one installer might be more expensive than the other. And I think it goes back to trying to have confidence in the person that you're speaking to at that. It comes back to the human to human side of things, and getting that feeling from a company. Obviously, I'm 100% biased towards us, but if you're a customer watching this and you're speaking to 3 companies, it's almost getting the feel for the company that's going to look after you the most, because ultimately something will go wrong with that system as well over the period of its lifetime, because they're not a 2-3 year investment, they're a 20-25 year investment. So it's trying to get that really good feel for the installer that's probably going to be looking after the system for that lifetime. And I suppose the next thing, so to refresh on that one then, because we kind of got off at a bit of a tangent. So your main considerations there were aesthetics, really. You look at the panels, where they were positioned, where the inverter and battery was positioned, cable routes, and everything like that. There'll be some customers potentially watching this that don't really care about that. They maybe can't see the roof from the ground. Exactly. So those considerations will change with every customer probably out there. Some might be massively fixated on price, might be the look of the batteries, but not too bothered about the panels. I think it's gonna change, I would think.
Yeah, just put the customer aspect. We had one where he put some panels on a barn down the end of his garden, and he wasn't bothered what they looked like whatsoever. He wanted the best performing panels, even not using optimizers, because there was nobody underneath that space. He wasn't concerned about the safety, and there was no shading. So he wanted to do a basic string system, generating as much as he could. So I think it's different for the circumstance if you're putting it on somebody's house as it is if you've got a ground mount system in someone's garden or something.
I think perspective as well is, where I live is in a village, the houses are built in a specific way, the roofs are specific, they have slate and tile, they don't just have...
Sounds a fun install.
Yeah, I think you commented on that, to be fair.
Yeah.
But, aesthetics, I live in a conservation area, I forgot about that actually, so I had to go speak to the council about, and I couldn't have it on a roof that were facing our main drive, so without planning permission I couldn't install them, whereas the roofs that they are covered under, you don't have to get planning permission then. So there's a few elements as well of just trying to be in keeping for the aesthetics.
That's another great point there, Rob. It's actually customers that are looking to have this installed. I'd hate for anybody to invest that 10 to 30 grand in a system and then find that you're getting a call from, because a nosy neighbour has reported you, and you're getting told that you potentially might have to take it all down. So have a look if you're in a conservation area, if you're a listed building, anything like that where you may need planning permission to have these systems. That is a really important one to look at. before you have anything installed. You still get prices, but just do your research in the back end to that.
I found out about 2 weeks before they were being installed that I lived in a conservation area, and I think I had to, I emailed Jess and I'm like, can we just hold off a minute while I try, and I couldn't get hold of the council, the planning people, and it was a nightmare. And then I was like, just go for it, and I got the call and the email like a couple of days before. But yeah, so don't make my mistake, basically.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm bombarding you with questions, Rob, when and not really giving Mark a chance to come in. He's enjoying watching me squirm. And so I suppose what a lot of customers want to know is, do the numbers actually tally up to what you get? And we've already discussed that you can never really expect it to be like for like, because it's, firstly, before you think of anything tariff-based, it's weather-based, which is never going to be the same year to year. But I believe you brought some kind of rough figures, and here we go, look. Neat and tidy, look. He's got some, it's all highlighted. So do you want to just take us through how the system's been performing? I know it's going to be based on 2023.
Yes.
Yeah, so a full year's worth of information.
So a bit of background really is, so they were installed in August 22, but obviously August, we're at the back end of the year production. So I think at this point, as we speak now, we've had more winters than we've had summers really. So, but my full year of 2023 now, it's worth noting, I've had an EV for so probably 6 months of last year, but in summer I didn't have an EV, so we're maximising export. But based on the figures, so last year with an EV for 6 months, doing 12,350 miles and running our house cost me £483. So I've worked that out to 4.7p a kilowatt is what we paid for electricity last year. Now, the average price last year was 27p a kilowatt. Now, yes, I'm still paying for electricity, but for me that is phenomenal. I don't care what anyone says. That's pretty unreal. Now, I also looked at how much it would cost without solar, and it would have cost us £1,615 plus then £310 for the EV, so 1,900 quid. So we've knocked down £1,500 in a year.
It's pretty good going, isn't it?
Especially when you bring in the vehicle to, like, when the vehicle is involved, as we all move to EV, or the majority of people, or a good chunk of people move to EV, it becomes a big part of that puzzle, doesn't it? With actually being able to charge the vehicle either at a really reduced rate overnight, or directly from solar. Because I know you've got your EV van.
We had this battle last week with my wife. She'd unplugged my EV van from charging because she wanted to export the solar energy off the household bills, and I was trying to save the business some money, because I know rapid charging, you're looking at 70, 80p a unit. So I'm like, there's the value equation there beyond just your own consumption when you are running your own business as well. So yeah, it plays a massive part in it, being able to store that generation up in a vehicle and then not pay for fuel. That's amazing.
It's phenomenal, and I think now, in hindsight, knowing what I know now, it's like an absolute no-brainer. Having an EV, a battery, and a solar panel system at home is like the perfect package, if you like, and it all makes sense, if you like, now. For me, as an individual, is that, I'm not paying £300 a month in fuel anymore. That's all in the car. Yeah, it costs more, but personally, it's all down to personal preference. I lease cars. I don't buy them. I'm not interested in buying them. And comparatively, I can't get a petrol version of my car for less money. So when you come to think about that aspect of it, depreciation and all that, EVs are pretty comparative for me. And then with the fuel savings and everything, they become very cheap assets to your personal, if you like.
I think the key there is, obviously those figures would still be good if you didn't have an EV, or you weren't able to charge an EV at your house. But for people that can't charge an EV at the house for balance, there's obviously a good chunk of that saving has come from the fact that you've been able to charge the car from your home. So for anyone watching this going, well, I don't have a driveway,
Yeah.
then that if they were looking at similar figures to you, a good chunk of that pie would be missing because they can't charge their car from the solar directly or from an overnight cheap rate because they're maybe having to use the big rapid chargers. So it is very individual, but even without that, was it about £400 saving through the car? It's still saved you a good chunk of power, a good chunk of money just by use from your own house usage itself.
What's the headline production figure from your system?
For kilowatts,
Yeah.
5.74 megawatts would that be? So
Yeah.
5,740 kilowatts.
Yeah.
So that's a good old amount of generation, and for consumers watching, that's how many units? 5,740. No, I'm probably getting that wrong.
So what was it?
74 megawatts.
Yeah, 5,740.
40 units,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
And I think to ignore the car stuff I've worked out, I've had a look on my charger how much I actually charged at home last year. Without an EV and with solar, it would have cost £20 in electricity for last year.
Right,
Wow,
okay.
That's really
Compared to
really good.
£1,600.
I was thinking of the typical consumption of most people if they haven't got an electric vehicle. You're kind of between 3,000 and 5,000 units. So although you're not going to be able to use all of your solar if you don't have a battery system, still as an overall comparative thing, you are sort of taking yourself off grid by what you're putting back into the system when you're not using it. So even if you're just going at a solar aspect and exporting what you generate, there's still that value there, isn't there? I think.
Yeah, and obviously with the tariffs, and you're able to export the power, batteries actually maybe, if you get onto one of those tariffs, become less important because certainly at this stage, because if you're out during the day and you can't put it into your car, it's actually better for you to just let that go back to the grid because you're getting your 15p.
I think that's another element to sort of 2023 figures compared to what this year is going to be like, because I think already, our battery system or Solar Edge, they've now integrated it a lot better and they're using algorithms now to figure out. So what I've noticed with our battery is it doesn't so we charge it during the cheap rate overnight, but it only gets, I think, about 60 or 70% full because I want a bit of buffer. But then come the morning when the sun's shining and it's going into the battery, it only charges it to 95%.
Right.
And I'm assuming, and I could be completely off the mark with this, is with it being DC coupled, it's allowing us to import energy into the battery at like 7 kilowatts, even though we've only got a 5 kilowatt inverter. So we're kind of maximising more of the array because it's DC coupled.
Yeah. So so that's another consideration for customers, isn't it? Really, it's the equipment that you're choosing, and this is why it is a bit of a headache for customers to try and choose, and the installers have to be educated in this to really advise. But certainly, as we have higher wattage panels as well, and we can fit more kilowatt peak up on people's roofs, the DC coupling of the battery, so effectively having one solar inverter where the solar feeds directly into that, but also the battery gets its supply from that one inverter, rather than having a solar inverter and a battery inverter, and them being what's called AC coupled. With the DC coupling, the solar power is able to basically bypass the inverter and go directly into the battery, so that you still can get your capacity from your battery to push power back into your house. So you're not gobbling up that, in your case, 5 kilowatts of capacity by having to charge your battery, because the DC is basically coming straight past that, and your inverter can still do its thing to supply. So, and if you have a really big array on your roof, then that just basically gives you more ability to charge that battery up quicker.
That's my understanding of it as well. But in my own home, we've gone for an AC coupled battery system because they give energy all in one. That's just a battery system in its own right with a relatively basic and dumb PV inverter. And the reason I went down that road was to try and maximise the output in an off-grid situation, which is a really stupid thing to do because we very rarely have power cuts.
Yeah.
But that was the techie side of me as an electrician, thinking I can make some brilliant content for YouTube with this as well by showcasing the power system when you are off-grid. So there's other aspects with that. Same with the EC coupled integration with Give Energy and the tariffs. They've got that smart integration now. So I've seen the same where my battery stops fully charging itself up at the cheap overnight energy, even sometimes when they're paying us to take energy because I'm on Agile rather than the Go tariff or whatever it is. So I've seen those changes, and it's interesting how AI plays a part in that. That's what's figuring all that stuff out. It understands the weather for the next day. It knows how your system performs, and it's trying to leave you a way of getting the best value. With that, I think it's really exciting how that's going to grow.
I do as well, because, and I don't think, if it weren't for me pretty much looking every hour at what the solar's doing, you wouldn't even know it's doing it. But then when you start looking into the graphs and comparing last year to this year we've produced less, but the export's more. And think, just things like when you look into it, it's going to work really well, I think.
Yeah, and I think with the whole AI thing, I know obviously that's people fall on two different sides of the whole AI thing, but I think it's going to be a very important part when you maybe look at a heat pump and you're trying to think, right, well, how the hell do I work out how to integrate my solar and battery system into my heat pump? Whereas if you can kind of let something else look at that whilst you're working and busy with family, to kind of look at, right, well, we know the weather's going to be cold but sunny, so we're going to have a lot of solar, but we're going to need to run the heat pump and all those stuff that as humans we kind of boggle our minds. I think giving that to a system like that is going to mean that the integration between all this equipment is so much sleeker.
And I think that's a good point. That you wouldn't understand how stressful it is trying to charge a car on a 7 kilowatt charger and trying to do it at 5 kilowatts, that you don't have the control of what kilowatts it's charging, and that is stressful. And when you're at work and you're busy, the last thing you want to be doing is faffing around. So if you could let something else do it, it's brilliant.
It comes back to the proposals we spoke about with Dan, doesn't it? That we said that's really hard for us as installers to get that right on the estimates. And actually, our customers, we're still only 18 months into this, but they're seeing a faster payback than we predicted because of the AI that's developed in the technology and the way the tariffs have shifted. But that's not to say that in 2 years' time that payback might stretch out longer, because those tariffs change and China takes over the AI or whatever, and something goes wrong with all of that. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? But I think it's exciting trajectory of industry.
Yeah, it is. It's very cutting edge. So just give us those headline kind of figures again, then, Rob. Because obviously we've. So what would you have been paying for 2023 if you hadn't have had solar PV and battery? What was it?
£1,615.
So it was £1,615 effectively if you had done nothing, just carried on as you were. £1,615, and then with the solar and battery system, what was it that you paid?
£20. And then you added an EV on top of that.
Yeah.
It's then £480.
Okay, so it's
1,500 quid at least, isn't it?
Yeah. It's mental, and
Some didn't charge you enough, I think.
Could have had another couple of grand out of that. No, but that there is quite remarkable for a property. And I know you obviously look at the system quite a bit and kind of try and plan things out. But even a customer that didn't want to have it as a part-time job, like what a lot of customers do want, but some people just want to fit it, see the returns, and they're busy with work and everything else that we all are, but they just want it to do its thing. Even if your savings aren't quite that, your savings aren't going to be far from that because there's only a limit as to how much you can affect the weather and what uses it and everything else. So don't think that to get those sort of savings, you need to be hawking over this system all the time, ready to turn this on and turn that on. Whilst if you do that, it'll probably help you marginally. Actually letting the system do its thing is very important. And the other element of that is that whilst the solar generation have made a lot of that impact on your bills, playing around with the tariffs now can make a massive impact, like the 7.5p overnight, the export.
It's probably worth mentioning that includes when my export was only 4p a kilowatt as well. I did have a portion at, say, 20p a kilowatt in between me getting another EV, whereas now that's kind of set at 15p a kilowatt, and it's now automating it, and I'd have no input really. So if anything, it's just going to get better than that.
Yeah,
I think those figures align with my system. To be fair, I've not sat down and worked it out in the detail that you have, but I think we're kind of on that same sort of space, 1,500 quid-ish a year with an electric vehicle.
which, like you said, if you're not getting much interest, let's be honest, if you are really savvy with money and you've got a lot of money, you can make investments that make you far much more money than what this is. But for people that you know, and I include myself in this, that those kind of big investments in stocks and shares kind of boggle them a little bit. Something like this, which has a return, but maybe not the massive returns that you get through playing the stock, you know, market and everything. This is something I think is manageable for people that want to, yes, put those savings that they've got in the bank because they're earning a couple of percent interest into something that increases the value of the house, allows them to play around with tariffs that might not even be out yet, but the battery is a very important part to that, and actually invest in reducing their monthly bill. So if something does happen, like the spike in energy prices that we saw, if you didn't do anything, you would be 100% affected by that, because there's nothing else you can do. If you are effectively over a year 20% reliant on the grid, it's only going to impact you on that little 20% area, because you are self-sufficient for the rest of it. And a lot of the times when you do have these big tariff spikes, they are also wanting your power more from the grid, so your export might go up. So getting these sort of systems allows you to be flexible.
I think you've touched on a good point there as well, and I have worked out the payback for me, which with the EV with 12 years. That comes under my warranties as well, which is positive. But there's the element of house price. In my opinion, I think a house is more desirable with solar panels. If you had two £300,000 houses, one with free electricity forever until it breaks, and then one that you're going to be spending, I don't know what a bill is nowadays.
Yeah, well, even your 1,650.
For the year, and surely there is an element of, as long as the system, you know, some people hate solar panels, but you know, I think for the vast majority there is, you know, an element. I'm pretty comfortable to say that my house price would be reflected.
I've done this research myself, and you're dead right, that's such a good point, because we're looking at payback in terms of getting your money back from what you saved in energy, but there's the asset value in what that is. And I know from having my house value pre the solar, we saw a 10% increase. Wow. And there hadn't been a change in the market rates. We did this as an experiment for our own business, thinking along the lines of marketing that towards customers, because we could say that it puts your house prices up 10%. We haven't done it, because I think just a singular example on my own property isn't a wide enough spread to make that call. But I think they definitely do add value to your property. What that is consistently to say out in the wider world, I wouldn't want to put a figure on it. But yeah, you're dead right. There's the asset value there. It hasn't dissipated just because you bought it and put it there. Same way buying a car and putting it on your drive. You're not waiting to get your money back from driving miles and miles and miles running it. It's still worth what it's worth.
And I think that point there is a really good one in the attack of house builders not putting these on houses.
Absolutely.
in a decent scale. You get 3 panels on a property, and you've gone to all the stress and the risk of having solar on a property to put 3 panels on. Put a 5 kilowatt system on. I think a 5 kilowatt system is really the minimum that most people should really have for where we're going as a property with heat pumps, EVs, and everything else and stuff. But you know, some people don't have the roof space for that, and that's fine. But so a lot of these properties that are getting built from scratch, that can be designed within certain guidelines, probably with planning permission, but can be designed to be tweaked a little bit that way, so it's south-facing, and actually bear in mind that whoever moves into this property as a new build might be there for the next 20 years of their life. Putting a renewable energy system on it seems a no-brainer to me.
The thing is, they can hide the cost in the price of the house, because realistically, you know, normal house prices, again, if we say 300,000, what is 15,000 in relation to 300,000? And the customer is not going to see that additional money. And my sister lives on a massive housing estate that every single house has 2 panels, and it's like, what a waste. You know, I get that. I suppose the reason for it is supporting the grid on a vast scale, but you've then passed all the hassle to the individual. And in my sister's case, she has no control over that system, because the house builder lost all the paperwork and stuff, so she gets zero benefit from it whatsoever.
I know from, and you might be able to say, Matt, but certainly on the new build market, when you're a renewables installer, trying to go into that, it is like a shark pit, because they want it for nothing, and that they want to meet the regs. They don't want to think about anything. They want to just literally tiptoe over it so they're compliant, but they don't want to do anything more than that. And I think that's a really tricky sort of place to be when you want to make money, but you want to do a really good job using good equipment, and they want it for cheapest system, quickest installed, and just big enough to get you over the regulations.
It's the same for all electrical and plumbing, I'd say, not just the solar stuff or any new build things. That's exactly the way they're pitching it, isn't it? They just want enough to comply, which is a sad state of affairs, I'd say. It's a shame and lost opportunity, I think.
Best time to do it. Best time to insulate, to put these systems in and everything. But there's a whole other podcast on new builds, and we might need to get whoever it is, Persimmon, on in the hot seat and actually ask them about that, which would be a good one. So if you, Mr. Persimmon, if you're watching, we'll have you. But Rob, so let's not tiptoe around it. What is it? Well, how much is it that you spent as a capital investment for the system that you've got?
So I can't remember. I think it was 18,500 there or thereabouts, I think, for the inverter battery and optimizers and fitting and the panels. And then I want to say it were around £1,000 extra for the hot water diverter, which came after. Probably wasted £1,000 there, but at the time it was the right decision.
It's a leap of faith, isn't it?
It is.
Defending my system there, wasn't I? Just really, you did right. You may
still see value for that in the future. You don't know what the tariffs are going to do.
And it's there. It's just sat doing its thing.
I don't really want to comment on it too much, because it's kind of like I'm trying to justify.
It's probably cheaper nowadays.
We're still specking them on our installs. And like I say, I've had comments on YouTube about that, but I think it's providing that robustness to a system for long-term value rather than what the energy market dictates you should do right now. Give the consumer the choice. If they want to make that choice, that's their call, isn't it?
I think there's a lot that comes into this now as well. So for people that are maybe sitting in front of a quote, watching this, ready to ring whoever the installer is you choose. Don't stop. And you may be thinking, right, do I go for this hot water diverter? Do I not? And it's always going to be an individual decision. Things that have come out since Rob had his installation, changes like the VAT. So energy diverters now are hot water diverters, as we call them. They are now 0% VAT rated. So at the time of install previously, and I know yours was kind of separate, Rob, but at the time of install, customers kind of felt like they had to either go all or nothing, because they were getting was it 5% at the time?
I think,
when we
5%
VAT.
5%.
Yeah, that's it. So 5% VAT at the time, it's now 0% VAT. So that's a change as well, and that includes a battery only. So you might not have to go for 3 batteries. You might go 2 just to see how you get on, and then maybe add another one, or 1 and add another one. And that's now 0%, as well as the energy diverters or hot water diverters. And I don't know if we've really explained what hot water diverter is, but just really quickly, it basically looks at how much surplus solar you've got, or you can boost it through an app or something to buy the power in, but it basically heats a resistive element like a immersion heater or a storage heater or something like that. So it's just another place to dump power, isn't it, really? So that's what Rob got for his immersion heater on that. So the big question is then, Rob, I suppose, is was it worth it in your eyes?
Absolutely.
Right, this episode can go out. we can share this episode.
And I think, I've been able to play with it. I've been able to experience it, and all the hearsay that was said beforehand is a load of rubbish. And it's EVs at same, but that's I'm all for EVs, It's the exact same, but there's a lot of comments thrown around that are just false, and you've just got to try it. And I think the facts and figures is what answer that. And again, I think my system has at least a 15-year warranty plus. I'll be paying it back in 12 at last year's rates, which I think is actually going to be better, so it's probably going to come down. And for me, it's a no-brainer, and I think every house that we have going forward, as long as the situation's similar, we will have it, because why not? Why like you say, with new builds, so put it on if we can.
Yeah. Well, that's thank God.
Breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah, this I
I'd
got.
go with someone else though.
Oh dear! I knew he'd get a little business card slid over. So to be fair, obviously this is the first solar PV system you've ever had, and battery system and everything. Yeah. Is there anything since doing the installation and choosing the kit that you've chosen that if you started it all again, with you woke up one morning, all the equipment was gone, and the money was back in your bank, and you could do it all again, what would be the things that you would do differently?
It's a tough one, because I definitely have a bigger inverter, but it's all right saying that now, knowing how it works, because I think it's impossible for anyone to know exactly how much your panels are going to produce. So, like, because of the DC coupled, I can physically see that we've done 8.4 kilowatts at one time of production. So my 5 kilowatt inverter's, not the best for that, or you're wasting 3 kilowatts that could be exported or whatever. How do you know that it's going to do that beforehand? Yes, I've got south-facing panels. Yes, I've got southwestish facing panels, but it's only 4 kilowatts that's south-facing. And I don't think you'd have been able to tell me that, and I don't think anyone could.
No, and I think, and I don't know if you've seen this, Matt, but I think as well the climate has changed as far as like the reason people are getting these, and we touched again a bit on this with Dan on the last podcast, or one of the last ones that we did, where the role of these systems and the purpose of these systems have changed from self-consumption systems to be generation systems that export to earn you money, and the battery being there as a separate entity to charge up from the grid. And when this was like 2 years ago, before there was tariffs like that around, but the whole export thing was a bit rubbish with 4p and all of that, you kind of don't really know at that point. You kind of just assume that system is going to be forever used as a self-consumption system, whereas nowadays it can be used to earn you money from the export, and your battery be there to buy power in from the grid.
Yeah, it's so true. You can't make that. It's easy with looking back with hindsight on anything. Calling that for the future is so hard. And I've made the same mistake on my own install, Rob. We've got an inverter that I wish was bigger than we've got. But again, it's the same thing. We don't know how we're going to use that generation. If we can make better use of it for the battery storage, because a lot of these inverters will output more power than their rated value when you have got that DC coupling. So you can store up more of that extra generation, but it's knowing if you're going to have drawn down the battery far enough to be able to do that at a particular point in time. We've got quite a lot of shading on the back of our house. I really wasn't sure how that was going to impact onto things. So there's a bit of a suck it and see approach with some of this, even as an installer who's done a lot of research. It's you're taking a leap of faith, as you said earlier on in this episode.
Yeah. Did you have a smart meter fitted beforehand?
I had one anyway.
You had one anyway, yeah. So that is, we mentioned again with Dan, keep going back to that one, the How to Size Solar and Battery podcast, but that is an important part as well, isn't it, really? So we have data that we can look at, and to have that smart meter long enough so that we've got a good data set to look at, and that is becoming more of a player in how to size these systems.
Absolutely, and I think, I won't be upping my inverter, I don't think anyway, unless things change, because, I think it's still the same where I'd have to pay the DNO to then upgrade, which is not a cheap gig, is it? I think it was £370 when we
for them to do the design, yeah.
I mean, are you allowed to say, do a design for 10 kilowatts and I'll only use 5? I don't know. Is that an option you could do? And it gives you that flexibility, because that is what's stopping me from saying, well, I'm going to spend £1,600 on a new inverter type of thing.
I did that on my house because I wanted to do some experiments on the shed, so I made an application for 10 kilowatts.
Right.
And the DNO said, well, you can do it, but we're going to export limit you to your agreed 5.
Right.
Anyway, so they'll still only let you have that through a G100 limitation on the system. So I'm allowed to have the inverter, I'm allowed to do my experiments and mess about, but they're not happy to accept any more than that 5 kilowatt.
Yeah, I think export limitation has come in massively as well, because people are wanting bigger systems to run all this electrical equipment, and the DNO probably know that they need this power going into the properties to not only reduce what your demand is in your property, but also for them to be able to draw upon that power from batteries and things to support them. So that's why we've got these in the electrical regs, the whole prosumer side of things. It's gone from electricity, it comes from Drax near us, through the cables into your house, job done. It's now power is flowing everywhere, and it must be quite a challenge for the DNO to try and handle all of that.
Yeah, down my street there's 50 houses. I think so far there's only 2 electric vehicles down there. Fast forward 5 or 10 years, there's going to be one on every drive, and the DNO will be begging me to export more power, I'm sure, to try and help meet that demand.
Yeah, 100%. So to sort of try to bring this thing to a conclusion, really, my last point that I've got here is, anyone watching this as a customer, is there any advice that you would give now that you've had this system for a couple of years to anybody starting that process of looking for a system? What advice would you give them?
I think it's what we've touched on sort of all the way through is, there is a bit of onus on you as the customer to do your research and understand, what you're buying. I think because otherwise you're going to be sold short quite easily, and I don't think that's no fault of whoever's doing the proposals. It's just there's a lot to it, and I think just having a base understanding is absolutely key, and then consider like what we did. Consider your options of different brands. What do they offer you? And that's where the understanding of maybe AC coupled battery, DC coupled battery, understand the benefits of what, and unfortunately you're going to go and have to ask your installers what all this means potentially, but there is a lot of content out there that explains this kind of stuff and in clear, easy form, and I think for me it's just understand what you're buying and make sure it's safe.
Yeah, definitely. Did you have anything else, Mike, that you...
I was just going to thank Rob for coming out. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you two guys chatting. I'm going to have to find one of my customers to bring in now to level the score. I just have that
opportunity there.
Definitely.
On Sam. I've really enjoyed that. I think it's brilliant of you, Sam, putting yourself out there to do that, setting out your prices in the way and talking about it so openly with a customer like this. I think this is a really valuable podcast for other people on that journey as well. And just to echo the comments that we've had with Dan's episode, finding the installer that's right for you is so important, and it's not a pitch for my business or your business, it's that feeling you have. I can't emphasize how important that is at consumer level, to do that research and find someone you're comfortable with. And thank you to you guys.
Thanks very much for coming on, Rob. I really appreciate it. I've got that £100 in the van for you. But it's really good to get it from a customer's point of view, and us as installers, and I know, speaking for me personally, we go through a learning process of how to put across all this information to customers, and that's what we want to do with this podcast as well, is have those open discussions out there so that customers watching this can pick up little points and ask those questions to customers. I know, for example, with your job, we'd have had some problems with the whole pass regulations, more so with fire alarm and things. So it's changing all the time. But thanks very much for coming on. Really appreciate it. And of course, please like, subscribe, and all that, like I mentioned right at the start. Anything else from you, Mark?
No, I'm good.
Great. Well, thanks very much, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.